Welcome to church this morning. If you're online, thanks for joining us. If we haven't met yet, my name is Natalie, and I'm one of the pastors here. And today we're continuing our journey through the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's a bit of a different book. It's not something that you can just breeze through or read quickly. You can't read a verse a day to be okay. It's a bit of a different book. It asks difficult questions. It challenges the way we actually think about success and happiness and what gives life meaning. And last week, Pastor Rick talked about that famous poem, A Time for Everything. And he invited us to look back in the seasons of our life to see where God is at work in each one of them. And we heard that there's wisdom in learning to recognize how God moves us through the seasons, whether they're good or difficult. And today, as we continue in that series, we're going to talk about having a wise perspective and learning to see life differently, learning to see life with the end in mind. And I know that's not the perspective we typically default to. I know it's not the perspective that's comfortable, and it's not something many of us enjoy doing, talking about the end of life or death. But it's an important perspective to think about. Because sometimes it takes knowing the end of something to truly appreciate the value of something. This is true of relationships or experiences. This is true of careers or different seasons in life. And this is true of us. Have you ever stopped to think about what will be said about your life when it is finished? At the end of your life, when you die, and someone sits down to write a few things about you, what will they write? What do you think it will say? Will they outline how you loved people and loved the Lord and lived faithfully? Or will it read more like a resume full of things you achieved or earned or accumulated? There's an author named David Brooks who actually talks about this, and he says that each one of us kind of live in this tension between two sets of values or virtues is what he calls them. One is the eulogy virtues, and one is the resume virtues. Resume virtues, you might know, are the skills and abilities and accomplishments you bring to the marketplace. They're the things you've achieved or earned or maybe even paid for. They're the degrees or their certifications, the things on your resume that tell people, hey, I'm credible, I should have a seat at this table, I belong in this room. And listen, there's nothing wrong with resume virtues. Many of you are taking classes right now or gaining experience or working through programs because you see the value of them. And the problem isn't that we build resume virtues. So then what is the problem? The problem is that we start believing that our resume virtues are the measure of our life and our identity. And it's such a big part of how we function as a society. I'm sure when you've met someone new, one of the first things you've asked is, so, what do you do for work? And it's not because we're shallow or we have nothing to talk about. It's because we live in a culture that has trained us to place a high value on resume virtues over any other quality. And this isn't something that switches on when you become an adult. It starts much earlier than that. In my neighborhood, there's a Facebook group that we're part of, and they post the regular things that neighborhood Facebook groups post. Sometimes gossip, sometimes it doesn't matter. Anyways, there was a post from this kid. He was maybe 14 or 15, and he was offering lawn care services. So he was offering spring cleaning and grass cutting and trimming. And so he described everything that he's offering. Remember, he's 14 or 15, I can't quite recall. And at the bottom of it, he wrote, over 6 years of experience. And I showed my husband, and we had a good laugh. But as I was preparing for today, it was such a good reminder of what we actually value in life. Our world has said that experience, even at 14 or 15, counts as something. And I mentioned that there were two virtues. So we talked about the resume virtues. The next one is the eulogy virtues. Now, eulogy virtues are deeper. They're the virtues that people will talk about at your funeral. They're the sort of things that you want to be remembered by. They're the things that you can't purchase or learn in a classroom, and they're things that probably won't ever show up on your resume. They are the things that you slowly develop over time through your lived experiences, through your faith, and even through the hardest seasons of your life. There are things like honesty and faithfulness, things like humility and generosity and kindness. Things that the world says it values, but actually spends the least amount of time developing or rewarding or celebrating. When was the last time you heard that someone was promoted because they were so humble? When was the last time you heard that someone was hired because they just seemed so trustworthy in their interview? I know we like to think that way, but it just doesn't happen. And David Brooks says it this way. It's going to be on a slide on the screen there. Our culture and our educational systems spend more time teaching the skills and strategies you need for career success than the qualities you need to radiate that sort of inner light. Many of us are clearer on how to build an external career than on how to build inner character. We expect eulogy virtues from other people. We know that they're important, but we don't value them the way that we should. And if we're not careful, we can spend our entire lives building things that look impressive while actually neglecting the things that really matter. But imagine a world where instead of pouring everything, all your time and energy and resources into building resume virtues, we gave that time and energy and resources into building something that will last much longer after we're gone. As we continue on in the series, The Pursuit of Wisdom, we're going to look and see that in a world that constantly encourages us to chase resume virtues, Ecclesiastes 7 actually reorients us to look at what really matters in life, and it guides us toward building eulogy virtues instead. And again, I know this book can be challenging for some people. Some of the things that the teacher says are uncomfortable, even counterintuitive. But this book is so rich because it forces us to look at life differently than what we naturally default to. And it brings to surface sometimes things that we miss altogether. As Pastor Rick mentioned last week, the book of Ecclesiastes is wisdom literature, so we need to read it with that lens in mind. It's not a prescriptive list of commands or do's and don'ts that tell us exactly what to do in every situation. It's a collection of observations and reflections and wisdom meant to guide us in understanding what it means to live a good and meaningful life according to God's plans. And one of the most consistent themes throughout this book is the invitation to embrace everything for what it's worth. The teacher is constantly challenging us to look beneath the surface of life and to stop chasing what appears valuable and to recognize what actually has lasting worth. So we're going to dive in. We're in Ecclesiastes 7. If you have your Bibles with you, it's in the Old Testament. If you don't, the scriptures are going to be on the screen. And we're going to walk through this scripture, through this text in pieces. And it might look disjointed at first, but it actually points us all in the same direction. Each verse, as we go line by line, is pointing us towards the same thing. Okay, so we're in Ecclesiastes 7, 1-4, and it says this. A good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you are born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time. When you read these passages, one of the things you may notice is this rhythm of this is better than that. X is better than Y. And you'll see that it follows a similar rhythm as the book of Proverbs. But instead of seeing good moral instruction, the teacher challenges the assumptions that we tend to make about life. He takes things that we would see normally one way and shifts them so that we can see things from God's perspective. But we need to be careful that when we're reading this, we don't see the teacher saying that one of these things is holy and the other one is sinful. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying that celebrations are bad and funerals are good. He's not saying that laughter is wrong and sadness is right. These better than sayings are not absolutes or either or ultimatums, okay? He's trying to emphasize that both things have their value, but one is better, and only one will actually make you wise. It's like saying, for example, hypothetically, Hallmark movies in July are better than Hallmark movies in December. Neither are bad, but one is better, right? I'd argue July is better. Also, there's 24 Sundays till Christmas. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at how he opens. He says, a good reputation, if we can get that back on the screen, is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. What an encouraging message. Aren't you so happy you came to church today? But stick with me. The author is not trying to be morbid or dismiss the gift of life. He's actually challenging us to think differently. He's asking us to step back and consider what really matters when all is said and done. He's trying to emphasize what we should really live for and maybe even recalibrate some of our thinking. In the ancient Near East, perfume was one of the most expensive luxuries a person could own. It symbolized wealth and status. And it was poured out to honor a guest or to celebrate something or to prepare a body for burial. It was highly valued. But the teacher says that your reputation or your name is even more valuable than costly perfume. And the people of Israel understood this very clearly, because to them, a name wasn't just something you happened to be called. Your name carried significant weight. It represented your identity, maybe your geography, and even your faith. So when he says that a good reputation is worth more than the most expensive perfume, he's reminding people that perfume can make you smell good for a minute, but your reputation will last forever. Do you guys remember when Axe body spray was a big thing? Yes, I do. I was in high school, and I remember those grade 9 boys coming out of their gym class, and they had just doused them. Was that you? They had just doused themselves with this musky spray. I mean, it's one way of thinking about it. But no matter how much they sprayed on, it didn't change who they were. They were still gross, annoying grade 9 boys. They might have smelled good for a while, but eventually something else came to the surface. But with your reputation, it's completely different. Your reputation or your brand or your name or your testimony doesn't fade with time. How many of you know that before you enter a single room, what people know about you or of you has already gone before you? And rightly or wrongly, people have made assumptions about you and judged you based on your reputation. Your reputation stays with you, and no amount of time or money or control or power can change it. And if you don't believe me, for those of you with kids, I'm sure you spent a lot of time thinking about the perfect name for your child because it carried a significant meaning for you. And I'm guessing that you probably didn't name your child something that maybe reminded you of an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend or maybe someone that bullied you in high school or elementary school. Stephanie. So when the teacher contrasts a good reputation with costly perfume, I'm fine. I have forgiven her. He's intentionally contrasting something temporary with something lasting. He's contrasting something external with something internal. And we know that your reputation takes years to build, but only moments to tear down. Anyone with money can buy perfume, but no one can buy a good reputation. And so the author is redirecting our attention to what's really important. At the end of the day, when you die, what will people talk about? They're not going to talk about your title at work or that nice steak dinner you went to or if you smelled good or if you had the nicest house. What people will remember is who you were. So the text goes on, says, better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. Sorrow is better than laughter. A wise person thinks a lot about death. And again, we see that word better. And he's not saying that the funeral is more fun than the party. Obviously, it's not. And better here doesn't mean more enjoyable. It means more beneficial or more formative. The teacher isn't condemning celebrations or laughter or parties. We see that in Ecclesiastes earlier. He says there's a time to laugh and a time to dance. He says that we should eat, drink, and be merry. And we know that God isn't against joy. God created laughter, and he commanded feasts for Israel. So the issue isn't whether parties or celebrations are good or that we should desire the hard or difficult times. The issue is whether we understand their place in our lives. And given the choice, I'm sure some of us or all of us would choose the good times over the hard times. I'm sure all of us would rather laugh than cry. We'd rather attend a birthday than a funeral. But the teacher is reminding us that hard times are more valuable than the good times, not because God delights in our suffering, but because hardship has a way of revealing things that comfort often hides. And he tells us why. It says it right in the text. It says, sadness has a refining factor or influence on us. Death and adversity seem to make us slow down and be more reflective. While we're at celebrations, we're not thinking or asking the deeper questions. But when we're in sorrow, we're slowing down, we're thinking harder, and we're realizing our need for God. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think some of the hardest seasons that we've walked through have also been the seasons that have shaped us the most. They've stretched our faith and they've exposed our weakness. They've taught us lessons that we might have never learned if we were just on the mountaintop. It's usually when there's sorrow or sadness that we start to realize our need for God. And we start to realize that God can get us through, and it's God who gives us meaning and purpose and value. And so that's why the teacher says it's better to spend time in the house of mourning, not because it feels better, but it teaches us something that celebration just can't. Let's not confuse enjoying life with living it wisely. We should never value the temporary experience more than the eternal perspective. Because when you start to live with the end in mind, you start to embrace everything for what it's worth, and also you start to embrace your limitations. One of the biggest illusions I think that we have in life is that we think we're in control. And while we have the ability to choose and free will to make decisions, there are things that we just can't control. There are situations or circumstances that we can't predict or change. And too often when something happens that's out of our control, many of us start looking backwards. And we convince ourselves that the answer is somewhere back there. But we're going to go on in the text, and the teacher says that that kind of thinking, looking backwards, is not wisdom. So we're in verse 10 to 12, and it says this. Do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask of this. Wisdom along with an inheritance is good, and an advantage to those who see the sun, so for everyone who's alive. For wisdom is protection, just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom keeps its possessors alive. Have you ever caught yourself saying, oh, those were the good old days, and just reminiscing about the past? I know I have. I'm guilty of it. When my husband and I first got married, we had this small little house, and it was perfect. The location was perfect. The layout was perfect. The finishes were perfect. It was so perfect. I loved it. And when we had to sell it and move, I was so upset. And for years after, every time something went wrong with our new house, I would reminisce about the perfect home that we had left. And not long ago, I was scrolling through some old photos, and I came across some pictures of the house, and let me tell you, it looked nothing like it did in my memory. The driveway was cracked and lifting. The chimney had a lean to it. It was still attached, but it needed some work. The siding was tired and needed updating. And even the footings on the deck had lifted. It probably wasn't even safe to stand on. There was so much about that house that was not perfect, but my memory had edited it so that it was perfect. And that's what nostalgia does. It edits our memories with rose-colored glasses. And we have a tendency to wish to go back to the things that used to be, to go back to times when times were simpler or easier or cheaper. And we especially tend to want to go back when our current life gets hard. When our current life doesn't go according to plan, for some reason, we look backwards. We imagine that if we had another chance at that season, we would appreciate it more or cherish it or live it differently. One scholar says it best. He says, we tend to romanticize the past and think that it was better than our current time. And Scripture is full of people who fell into this way of thinking. When the Israelites were miraculously brought out of slavery from Egypt, remember they were slaves, they were actually reminiscing about the food they had once eaten. Lot's wife was no different. She was spared from the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah. And when given the instruction to not look back, she looked back. Even in Luke 9, Jesus tells a would-be follower that no one who puts his hand to the plow and keeps looking back is fit for the kingdom. And so we see here that the teacher is advising this as well. We can't move forward while simultaneously looking back. If you're always looking for yesterday, then you're going to miss what God is trying to do today. Church, don't start idolizing the past so much that you can't see God's faithfulness and provision and mercy and grace in the present. Living the way that God intended means that we learn from the past and we let the past shape us, but we don't keep looking back as if God stopped moving when that season ended. Let's not be so comforted by the past that we forget God's goodness in the present. Text goes on and it says, wisdom along with an inheritance is good and an advantage to those who see the sun, for wisdom is protection just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom keeps its possessors alive. When the teacher says that wisdom is like an inheritance, he's saying that both have tremendous value. Again, he's not saying that one is bad and one is good. An inheritance or money can provide security. It can provide opportunities and protection. It can open doors. It can relieve burdens. But inheritance or money alone can't help you make wise decisions. Money can make life a lot easier, and please hear me, the teacher is not saying that money is evil or that you should take a vow of poverty. Money can do a lot, and I'm sure many of us wish we had more of it. But money without wisdom leaves you exposed. It leaves you living how the world thinks you should live instead of living how God says you should live. Just look at all the lottery winners, people who have hit a jackpot more than we can even imagine. And many of them have gone into bankruptcy only a few years after their winnings because they didn't have the wisdom of God to know how to steward it wisely. The text also tells us that wisdom is protection. I think one of the best ways to understand wisdom is to see wisdom as a protective guardrail that will help us live in a way that no amount of money can buy. And we know that guardrails aren't there to ruin our drive. They're there so that we don't drive off a cliff. So in the same way, godly wisdom helps us to stay out of the ditches and helps us to make decisions that we won't regret. But wisdom is not a guarantee that life will always go the way we want it to. There are things that God has determined or allowed for us that we will never understand on this side of heaven. Things that we can't change or even know about. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 13, we're moving on in the text, says, "Consider the work of God, for who is able to straighten what he has bent?" The teacher is reminding us that even though we might have all the godly wisdom we can imagine, there are still limits to our understanding. There are still things that God allows in our life that we will never be able to explain. And yes, God has made some paths crooked. And I think one of the hardest things we have to make peace with is that we don't get to know what's coming, and we don't get to have an answer for everything. But whether you're in a season of hardship or in a season of prosperity, there's wisdom in trusting and knowing and believing that God is sovereign over all of it and nothing catches him off guard. There's nothing that you can do or counter that God is surprised by. God allows both the good times and the difficult times. Verse 14 says this, "On the day of prosperity, be happy. But on the day of adversity, consider that God has made the one as well as the other, so that a person will not discover that anything will come after him." Don't think that when life is good, it's because of you and all your hard work, and that when life is bad, it's because of God. We read here that God has made both things. So when life is good, enjoy it, celebrate it, receive it. But when life is bad, pause and reflect. Ask, what is God doing in you and through you in this season? How are you being refined in your sadness? One commentary said it this way: God blends them, and it's talking about the good and the bad. God blends them in our lives in such a way that we can't predict the future or count on our own human wisdom or power. Our inability to predict the future is not a limitation meant to create anxiety or stress in us. It's meant to draw us to a deeper dependence on God. And so Pastor Rick is going to come up in a minute and lead us in our reflection today. And as we've looked at these different sections of Ecclesiastes 7, they can almost feel like disconnected thoughts. But when you step back and look at the whole chapter, you begin to see that everything is pointing us in the same direction. Each of these thoughts reminds us that when we live with the end in mind, we begin to think differently and act differently and value things in life differently. In order to appreciate the value of life, we need to see it from the perspective of the end. And that's not morbid, that's wise. When we live with the end in mind, we stop investing so much of ourselves into what the world has determined is important for us. Remember those eulogy values, virtues we talked about? Those are the things that endure. And when we remember that our lives are finite, we begin to really know what is important in the eternal. So Pastor Rick is going to come up and lead us in our reflection here.